name is Dr. Preeti Reed, and I'm an instructor at the Center for a Conscious Planet. We are delighted to have you join us at the Sadhguru Center Speaker Series, where we present virtual lectures and discussions highlighting research and explorations of our multidisciplinary community of scientists, global experts, and thought leaders. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Sadhguru Center for a Conscious Planet is a multidisciplinary research center based at Department of Anesthesia, Critical Care and Pain Medicine at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. Our mission is to weave together science and spiritual wisdom through research and education and outreach. We offer wellness programs, conduct scientific studies, and collaborate with global leaders in diverse settings to enhance consciousness, cognition, and compassion. Our goals are to bring tools of well-being to patients and providers and make the world a healthier and happier place to be in. Today's event is being sponsored by Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network. We will hear more about this sponsorship and MHTTC from Lola Nedich, coordinator of Harvard and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center site for the New England Mental Health Technology Transfer Center.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. We are so thrilled to be able to co-host this wonderful event, and I'll start by telling you all a little bit about our organization. The purpose of the MHTTC network is technology transfer, disseminating and implementing evidence-based practices for mental disorders into the field. We offer a wide variety of free resources for the mental health workforce, such as webinars, toolkits, clinical briefs, and online courses. You can view these on our website at mhtTCnetwork.org. Now, I just want to review a few Zoom housekeeping items before we begin. Participant microphones will be muted at entry. If you have any questions during the event, please use the chat box. This session is being recorded and it will be emailed to all participants once available. If you have questions about MHTTC after the session, please email newengland@mhtTCnetwork.org. At the end of the month, we will send you a certificate of completion that you can submit to your particular board for continuing education credit. Please contact ifisher@c4innovates.com for more information on CEs after the event. Next slide, please. These are some MHTTC acknowledgements. Next slide, please. The MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. That language is strengths-based and hopeful, inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences, healing-centered and trauma-responsive, inviting to individuals participating in their own journeys, person-first and free of labels, non-judgmental and avoiding assumptions, respectful, clear, and understandable, and consistent with our actions, policies, and products.
Thank you, Lola, for the wonderful introduction. Our speaker series presentation today is on reducing youth suicide rate risk by enhancing positive emotions by Dr. Shirley Yen, who is an associate professor at Harvard Medical School in the Department of Psychiatry at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and training director of clinical psychology internship program at Massachusetts Mental Health Center. Dr. Yen is also a member of our scientific advisory board at Sadhguru Center and a course planner in our upcoming conference. Dr. Yen's programmatic line of research has focused on assessment of suicide risk in vulnerable populations and the development of intervention to decrease risk for suicidal behaviors. In her recent research, Dr. Yen explores the implementation of positive affect techniques to reduce suicide risk and has developed an intervention, Skills to Enhance Positivity, STEP, which she will be talking about today. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Shirley Yen.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for being with us today. So can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great, wonderful. All right, so today I'm going to talk about an acceptance-based approach to increase our awareness to positive emotions that should increase resilience and decrease risk for suicidal behaviors in at-risk youth. So today what I'm going to do is describe how positive and negative attentional biases may affect suicide risk. I'll describe the broaden and build theory of positive emotions, and I'll describe specific strategies to increase one's attention to positive emotions and experience as we've proposed in the STEP intervention, and also be presenting some pilot data. So, as many of you are likely aware, suicide is a significant, suicide in youth particularly, is a significant public health crisis. And this is already on top of an overall youth mental health crisis, which has really gotten worse in the past decade, particularly since the pandemic. And as you can see from this table, which shows the leading cause of death among US youth, suicide is a leading cause of death across all racial and ethnic groups, and it is the leading cause of death in Asian and Pacific Islander youth, as well as Native American youth. And across all groups, the number of youth who've died by suicide is now greater than the number who've died in motor vehicle accidents. And that number has been reduced due to public health measures such as seatbelt laws and car seat laws. So, and as you can see from these graphs, the suicide rates in children, teens, and young adults have been trending upwards in recent years, and this that's been the case with ideation and behaviors as well. So now, most of the research on suicidal behaviors has focused on what I refer to as the risk pathway. And one way of conceptualizing risk factors is this distal versus proximal. So distal risk factors, for example, may be depression, anxiety, trauma, or stress from a stressful family environment, minority stress from having a marginalized identity. And these tend to be more chronic and stable. But there's also been a tremendous interest in recent years in proximal risk factors with the emergence of tools to conduct EMA. And this has been really exciting and important because most suicide crises are often fluctuating, and they tend to be triggered by a specific event like a bullying incident or a fight with a parent or a breakup or a loss of some kind. So, and many interventions that target suicidal behavior focus on these risk factors, whether it's distal, like reducing depression, reducing substance use, or proximal, like better emotion regulation skills, and how can we how can we better handle these stressful circumstances. And this makes a lot of sense because risk factors do drive the bulk of prediction models in suicide. But there's another pathway that we shouldn't forget about, which is the resilience pathway. And that's because most people, even high risk individuals, are not high risk all the time. So most at-risk teens, when they're, or even high-risk teens, when they're faced with these circumstances, most of the time they do choose alternative behaviors. So it's really important to better understand how to increase resilience to sort of buffer the effects of the risk factors. So how I first became interested in positive affect as a mechanism for suicide risk was a study that I conducted in which we followed teens who were admitted to the hospital due to some suicidal behavior. And we wanted to observe, well, what factors at baseline predict prospective suicidal behaviors, okay? And we also know that the time after discharge from a inpatient unit is a really high risk time for recurrent suicidal behaviors. And to my surprise, low positive affect emerged as a really robust predictor. So it was so low positive affect is measured by the affective intensity measure at baseline, significantly predicted suicide events during the 6 months of follow-up. And how we defined suicide events was either an attempt or an emergency intervention to intervene in an attempt. And this was significant even after controlling for a number of other variables like depression severity and anhedonia. And so it was a very robust finding. And also around this time, there was an explosion of positive psychology stories in the media. And from my perspective, the hype had gotten a little bit ahead of the science. And quite appropriately, there have been some backlash to this, and that continues today in what people refer to as toxic positivity. I really like the title of the middle one, Happiness, Enough Already. And that refers to this, the pressure to maintain a positive mindset or outlook, no matter how bad the circumstances are, which can really feel invalidating or dismissive, especially if someone had just attempted to take their life. At this point, I would like to do a waterfall chat, and unfortunately, I can't see the responses, so maybe someone could can shout them out for me. But at this point, don't enter anything. This is a gimmick I learned during when we were all in Zoom world. Think about what are some examples of well-intentioned comments that you may have received that maybe didn't sit well with you. Okay, and when I say go, if you can enter it, please do so. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
What doesn't kill you make you stronger?
Oh, great. I'll have audience participation. Great. What doesn't kill you make you stronger? Anything else? Everything will be okay. Are you able to read some from the chat or? Okay. I knew you'd be fine. Things could be worse. Everything happens for a reason. We're getting the message here. Probably don't need to go on, but basically, when I looked at some of the positive psychology literature, my concern was that some of it might not resonate with teens, right? Because teens feel like they have so little control over their environment to begin with. So the challenge then is, how do we not throw out the baby with the bathwater? Because I do think, how do we harness some of the benefits of positive psychology? Because there's a lot there. So we set out to develop an intervention premised in research from affective science, relying on specifically 3 bodies of research, the first being the negativity bias. And I think most everyone is familiar with the functions of negative affect, which is to protect. So for example, fear and anxiety tells us that there's a potential danger in an environment. Sadness cues us to a potential loss. And anger tells us that someone might be threatening us, right? And when we experience one of these emotions, what happens is that we're wired to focus our attention on the perceived threat. And in the process of doing so, we then also discount any competing stimuli, right? Because once upon a time, when we're being chased by wild animals, those beautiful flowers that you're running past might be a dangerous distraction. So we're wired to do that. This is evolutionarily adaptive. And this is referred to as the negativity bias. But there's also a competing, it's actually not a competing hypothesis, but it's complementary. So just as negative emotions have important functions, positive emotions may also have very important and opposite functions, which is to enhance our survival by broadening our attention, right? Rather than restricting, positive emotions may broaden such that we might have more novel thoughts, are more creative, are willing to take some social risks. And this in turn then builds more personal resources, builds our social support, and then also begets more positive experiences. And then we cycle back to having more of these experiences. And you might recognize some of these things I mentioned as protective against suicidal behavior. So in fact, social psychologists have, for the past 20 years or more, have been building evidence for this theory through laboratory studies where they use experimental paradigms where participants are randomized to get a positive mood induction, like watching video clips of puppies playing, or a neutral mood induction, and then asked to do a task. They found that participants who have been randomized to the positive mood induction tend to do better on a variety of tasks, and some of these are listed here, but I just want to mention just a few in general. One is that when they're asked to solve a problem, those who've had a positive mood induction are able to generate more solutions. They're also able to have greater trust in strangers or acquaintances that they just met in that laboratory paradigm. They rate their close relationships as more intimate. So you can hear that a lot of these are really socially and emotionally adaptive. Now, another idea that serves as a premise for our intervention is the idea of a positivity ratio. That to overcome the potency of the negativity bias, we need to have a higher ratio of positive affect. Fredrickson and her colleagues have suggested that a 3-to-1 ratio might be the optimal, balance or for well-being. But and whether that's correct or not, it has been debated. But the idea that a positivity ratio is important has also been supported by a large body of research from Dr. John Gottman and his colleagues on couples relationships. And they've observed numerous hours of thousands of couples of videotapes interactions. And they found that it wasn't fighting or negative interactions per se that led to marital dissatisfaction, but it was the imbalance of not having enough positive interactions to offset that. And he uses this analogy of an emotional bank account that positive interactions are like small deposits and negative interactions are like a big withdrawal. And the key that he found was that the small deposits, they didn't have to be big grand gestures. They could be small gestures of expressing gratitude or just being kind. So now, if we were to take this body of research and apply it to individuals, that would mean that it's not necessarily about changing the negative emotions or changing the undoing the event, but it's about creating more opportunities to have positive experiences, positive emotions to offset that balance. So in rethinking positive psychology, I think it's helpful to go back to the framework that I had laid out earlier in terms of thinking about the risk pathway and the resilience pathway. So many of you might recognize this in terms of risk reduction. One prevailing theory is treatment is cognitive behavior therapy or CBT. And in CBT, we focus our attention on trying to change maladaptive thoughts. And that makes a lot of sense because thoughts are more amenable to change in the context of risk paradigm, especially because the negative emotions, they're protective, right? So by changing thoughts, you hope to change the emotions and behaviors. But when we think about the resilience paradigm, where actually emotions and positive emotions might also be protective in enhancing survival, that perhaps by targeting emotions and increasing the experience of those, that might also lead to behaviors and thoughts. And in fact, I would argue that if you were to put the CBT paradigm on thoughts by trying to increase optimism or positive expectancies, that, well, it might be reassuring or it could be invalidating. And we know that there's a real risk of building overconfidence or actually building positive expectancies if it's not matched to someone's reality. So I really like this quote from gratitude researcher Robert Emmons: to deny that life has its share of disappointments, frustrations, losses, hurts, setbacks, and sadness would be unrealistic and untenable. Life is suffering. No amount of positive thinking exercises will change this truth. So with that in mind, we developed the skills to enhance positivity intervention. And as you can see, STEP is acceptance-based. It's not a happiness intervention. Happiness connotes something to be attained, a state of being, whereas what we're trying to do is build small moments of attention shifting to emotions that may be discounted. So STEP is adjunctive. It's not intended to be a primary standalone intervention. Many people really greatly benefit from individual therapy where they can focus on their personal risk factors. This is intended to be more transportable, more fitting within a public health framework. And it's more emotion focused. We focus on eudaimonic emotions, the ones that tend to be more sustaining, like fulfillment, gratitude, versus hedonic, which is more akin to sort of pleasurable events. Now, pleasant events certainly has their place in mood regulation, emotion regulation, but in STEP, we're focusing on eudaimonic ones, which are more self-generating. And it's intentional. We use an exercise analogy. We try to build this as a practice, as a daily habit, sort of, so that we get used to it. It becomes habitual. So, sort of like how swimmers might build muscle memory. You probably have heard the expressions neurons that fire together, wire together. And to that effect, we also utilize daily text messaging to help build daily practice. So STEP, this is the four main contents of STEP. Actually rapport building and psychoeducation is really, really important because it gets at the why. So, we utilize a lot of skills such as mindfulness meditation, savoring gratitude. None of these are really unique or innovative or in itself that particularly interesting to adolescents. And so you really have to sort of build a motivation of why are you doing this? Why would you want to do this? And it's also important to make it feasible for them, okay? And so we really try to work on promoting agency. So I think most everyone here and in the audience is familiar with the scientific support for mindfulness practices, and many of you probably have your own practice. The one thing I do want to point out is that it might seem paradoxical that a practice grounded in non-judgmental awareness might lead to more positive states, but our goal here is to help focus our attention. Right? So to help us be more readily open and notice positive experiences that might be pushed aside due to negativity bias or, our automatic thought or behavioral patterns. And what we try to do in our sessions is to personalize a practice so that it's really feasible for that individual. So, for example, we always ask, have you practiced this before? And what was the context? And it's not unusual that we get teens say, yeah, I did it in my health and PE class. Yeah, with 30 other kids, I hated it, right? Fair enough. Maybe it's really hard to do it with other people in the room. It feels very vulnerable to do this exercise. Have you tried it alone? Trying it with a guided meditation app. So we try to work on, trying to counteract those barriers. And, we'll try different types of exercises. So we might start with concentrative because it's easiest to focus on a breath or something like, or a breath or an object in the room. If that proves to be too hard, let's say they say, I can't do this, I can't sit still. We might try movement exercise or stretching or something like yoga. And for those who are more practiced in this, we might try something a little bit more challenging, like a mantra or loving kindness meditation or a metta. So the key is really feasible practice. Another exercise that we practice is gratitude. And here too, many studies have found that gratitude practice reduces lifetime risk for a number of mental health challenges, including depression, anxiety, substance use. Gratitude has been said to serve 3 relationship functions: find, remind, and bind. So gratitude helps us find new social relationships. It helps us, it reminds us of the reasons why we're in those relationships and helps bind those connections. Now, gratitude can be an internal experience of reflection for the things that we're grateful for, and they could be very small events or big. Or it can be expressions of gratitude, which are actually a little bit more powerful because they also promote the social connection with others. And the three practices that we utilize in STEP are 3 good things, intentional expressions of gratitude, and random acts of kindness. So our last practice is savoring. Savoring is a practice of fully enjoying and extending our positive emotions. So it's sort of putting the pause button on that experience. And by prolonging that experience, it helps maintain that impact. So while it's most easily experienced as a here and now exercise, it can also be done with something in the past or something in the future. So something in the past, it could be, journaling of a past event, looking at a photo or memorabilia. You could savor the future by planning an event. And of course, savoring the present. Some examples might be really enjoying the taste or texture of your food, enjoying really paying attention to nature, or, being with a pet. And similar to gratitude, it can be introspective exercise or it can be done interpersonally, such as sharing a story or an experience with someone else. And that interpersonal aspects really strengthens the effect. At this point, I'm going to take a pause and have you all do a savoring exercise. So you take out your phone and scroll through your photos and look for a random photo that you took. And maybe it was during a time of amusement or something you just wanted to remember. I see some smiles and chuckles in the audience. Okay, is anyone brave enough to share with me their experience? Yeah, go ahead.
I took a picture of my friend in front of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie sign yesterday before Oppenheimer. So.
That's great. Yeah, and right, and so what I've often heard. Anyone else, by the way? No. Okay. Oh yes, go ahead. Great. Yeah. And so what I've often heard is that sometimes you took a photo that you even forgot that you took because it was kind of amusing at the time, but didn't look back, or spending time at the beach is sort of transports you back for a moment to that time. And what I like about this is it's so simple. You can do it at any time, and it's just really easy to utilize. So in terms of stuff, we also have a remote delivery phase. So after discharge, to facilitate practice, we send daily text messages. And the purpose of the texts are to promote at-home practice and to also build mindfulness. So the text program begins with a series of mood monitoring questions that asks about positive and negative moods. And this is followed by some feedback based on their mood responses and sort of the ratio of positive to negative findings. So if they had more negative moods, they might get this message, this may be especially hard today, but still good to practice. And then we ask them what type of practice they like to do. And then we send a message based on their response. And the message comes from some automated text messages banks. Now, in the pilot version of STEP, we also did call teens and parents once a week for the first 4 weeks, but we dropped the phone calls in the current trial, and I'll talk about that. Okay, now what type of practice do you think was most frequently requested by teens? Who thinks mindfulness? Raise your hand if you think it was mindfulness. What about gratitude? Savoring. Ooh, I think I may have primed you. Okay, all right, so you'll stay tuned and you'll find out. That was, for those online, that was a big response for savoring. Okay, so we targeted the intervention for adolescents between the ages of 12 and 18 who were admitted to an inpatient psychiatric unit due to some suicide risk. And this is because those who are hospitalized tend to be more acute and have a higher level of need, and they can benefit more from an adjunctive intervention. And as I mentioned, the months after discharge are a particularly high risk time. The intervention is transdiagnostic. Our only diagnostic exclusion criteria were acute psychosis, intellectual disability, and autism only if it interfered with their ability to engage. We wanted to reach a wide range of adolescents, and this is particularly important because suicidal behaviors, really affects people of a lot of different diagnostic profiles. They had to have text messaging capabilities and be English speaking. So we conducted 2 pilot trials. Both of these are published now. One is an open developed trial with 20 participants to assess feasibility and acceptability and to make adjustments to future trials. And one of the things that we adjusted was extending the duration of the text messages. So originally we had planned on only delivering the text messages for a month, but based on feedback from teens and family, many wanted the text messages for longer. So we then conducted a pilot RCT trial in which recruited 52 participants randomized to either STEP or enhanced treatment as usual, where they were receiving text messages on healthy habits. And in this trial, the STEP participants had an option to extend the text messages for 3 months. In both trials, our participants were mostly female identified, white, and we had a good range of socioeconomic diversity. And as you can see from this graph, our participants had quite a number of many of distal risk factors. So you could see one striking thing is that our enhanced treatment as usual had really above 70% reported some childhood sexual abuse. And both of our STEP conditions had really high rates of past suicide attempts and psychiatric hospitalizations. One thing I want to bring your attention to is that MDD, which is endorsed by about 50% of our population, that also means that those who met our inclusion criteria who were admitted due to suicide risk, about half of them did not meet criteria for major depressive disorder, which really goes to show the heterogeneity of individuals who engage in suicidal behaviors. So with regard to feasibility, we were able to deliver the majority of the planned STEP interventions. Those that were missed were due to the team being discharged before we could complete the sessions. But we were particularly interested in the rates of engagement with the text messages after they were discharged, when they were at home. And engagement we defined as providing the password that was given to them to launch the program of that day. So every day they had to launch a program to get the password, to get the first text. But it also timed out so that if they didn't do anything, they would get a skill. And so we found that on 70% of days, the STEP participants engaged, compared to 50% in enhanced treatment as usual. And on 58% of days, we had complete engagement, which meant they answered every prompt, which is pretty impressive because A, they're teens, and B, we did not pay them for their responses. So this was completely naturalistic. And other notable characteristics were that when given the choice, 52% opted for a 3-month extension. Again, not paid, and so because of this, rate, we just in the RCT that we're currently doing, we just automatically extended to be a 3-month trial. We did find that in our open, in our open trial, girls were more likely to engage with the text than boys, and participants from lower SES were more likely to engage, which is good news because this is a group that tends to have more barriers or into accessing interventions. So it shows that digital interventions might provide more equitable access. In our RCT, we did find racial minorities were less likely to engage with our text interventions, so we definitely have some more work to do there. In terms of the acceptability of skills, we found that 3 indicates satisfied. We found that overall there was in both trials there was high satisfaction with in the open anyway, really high satisfaction with savoring and psychoeducation. In the RCT trial, mindfulness and psychoeducation were the most favorite components. So two things. One is that everyone really liked the psychoeducation, which you might think is surprising for teens. But that speaks to the importance of getting their buy-in and motivation. The other thing is gratitude got a lot less love from the adolescents. In terms of acceptability of the various modalities, we had really high acceptability. Here we also show the parent responses. We had high acceptability for the overall program and the text messaging component. However, the parents were definitely more satisfied with the phone calls and the family session than the adolescents were. And so in future trials, we ended up dropping the phone calls and the family sessions, first because the teens were not really sold on them. And second, these two elements were the hardest to implement and to execute, and that in turn lowers feasibility. So now, the important slide. So what were our outcomes? So here in the orange bar, we have is our naturalistic study. And in our naturalistic study, when we just followed kids after discharge, we found that in the 6 months after a follow-up, that 18% had attempted suicide and 36% had a suicide event, meaning either attempt or emergency intervention. And that orange bar is very similar to the green bar, which is our enhanced treatment as usual. Very, very similar. Our two-step interventions, however, had fewer participants engaging in attempts or events. In our RCT trial, the green and pink, we had about 50% less participants engaging in suicide events. Now, when we looked at the total number of events, because some kids had multiple attempts, right? So we wanted to look at, well, what's the total number? We could only compare this in the RCT only because they were balanced in sample size. Well, we found that there wasn't a difference in the number of attempts, but in terms of the number of events, this is where we get a lot of difference. And what distinguishes the events is that in addition to attempts, it's emergency interventions. And so what we might infer from this is that those randomized to STEP felt more self-efficacy in being able to manage the suicide crisis so that they didn't have to utilize ERs or inpatient admissions. Now, the bars on the left correspond to the week prior to hospitalization and the percent that endorsed having active suicide ideation. The bars on the right is the worst week during the follow-up period. And as you can see, the STEP group, the pink, purple bars, had significantly lower, a greater decrease in suicide ideation. This was a medium effect size. Now, I mentioned that we also asked for mood ratings, and we found that on 84% of days, the positive mood ratings were higher than the negative mood ratings. And on 60% of days, the ratio of positive negative was by at least a 3-to-1 margin, which is encouraging. And the most highly selected skill was actually mindfulness. I've done this before, and after the savoring exercise, it's not unusual for audience members to think savoring was the most, that shows you the power of the practice. The savoring was requested 25% of days, and this was followed by gratitude at 20% of days. And when we asked whether they practiced a skill from the day before, participants reported that they had on 79% of days. One question that I frequently get is, well, what about adapting this for group-based intervention, which would clearly be more efficient? Now, we initially developed STEP as an individual intervention to allow for the personalization, which I think is so important. But with the strain on our hospital-based mental health workforce, I think group-based intervention is definitely something that is worth considering. And we did develop a group protocol, which was piloted in 52 young adults in an outpatient community clinic. Here, the inclusion was based on depression, as they were outpatients, and very few, or I don't think any, had active SI. We did a 2-to-1 randomization, 2 to STEP and 1 to healthy habits. And how this worked was that the STEP groups met for 4 weeks, each week covering one of those content areas. And on each day of that week, they would get a text message corresponding to what was just covered. But then during the extension period, they can choose what skill they wanted. And we found really high acceptability and adherence and really high engagement rates with the text messaging intervention. And while we didn't find differences on clinical outcomes, it was a very small sample size and it wasn't powered to find differences. We did find that within the STEP condition, text engagement rate during the 4-week group trial predicted lower depression post-intervention after adjusting for baseline depression. And texting rate during the 3-month extension was associated with higher positive affect at 3-month follow-up, also adjusting for positive affect at post-intervention. So again, really small sample size, but it's promising in the right direction. And so just really quickly to summarize, our multiple trials find that STEP is feasible and acceptable to teens. And, while it may lead to less suicide events, really these are small trials and really ideally need to be replicated in larger trials. Finally, we were really pleasantly surprised at the high level of engagement with the texting intervention. We had toyed with the idea of using an app, but we've had good success with text messaging. It's widely available. And I think, one thing about digital app interventions is that they do show a steep drop-off after initial use. So in terms of a future direction, really the next step is a fully powered efficacy trial. But there's also been some consternation in the scientific community at how long it takes for an intervention to be implemented in clinical settings. So we're currently being funded by NIMH to do a hybrid clinical effectiveness implementation trial at 3 different sites, where we're asking unit-based clinical staff to administer STEP. And we've had wonderful clinical partners. And it's also been very challenging because really we're doing this at a uniquely challenging time for hospitals-based units, many of which are facing severe staffing shortages. But the silver lining here is that we've also created on-demand tools such as YouTube videos to help deliver some of this content to reduce burden on staff. And so that effort can be expanded to other settings, like, for example, primary care clinics or emergency departments where we have a tremendous problem of kids who are boarding, waiting for a bed. So finally, I just want to wrap up by thanking the participants, their families. In this presentation, I presented data from 4 different studies. So I want to thank NIMH and an anonymous donor, and my clinical and research collaborators, of which there are many here. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to taking your questions.
I invite you to take a seat there. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for question and answer session. This is an exciting part of our event where you get a chance to engage with our esteemed guest, Dr. Yen, and delve deeper into the topics we've discussed today. Virtual viewers, please do not shy to ask your queries with us, share your queries with us. Does anybody have a question here? Yes.
Thank you, Shirley, for that wonderful presentation. I had a few questions. The first one is in the STEP bundle. You had a bundle of things you're using for intervention, right? I think you showed the participation, but which one was the most used? Was it mindfulness?
Oh, yes. Is this on? Yes, it was the most frequently requested on 55% of days was mindfulness.
And did they use all of these? How many people actually used all of these bundles? I mean, all the components.
So they do. So the intervention, in the intervention, we practice all of that. So they just get to choose during the text messaging portion which one they want. So we haven't looked at this data, but I do think that participants don't always select one kind. So in terms of the requested skills, I think 55% wanted to practice mindfulness on that particular day. 25% wanted to practice a savoring exercise, and 20% on gratitude. But theoretically, they participants would have practiced all of them. And certainly in the in-person component, we do practice all three.
Okay. One last question is, often people ask for the meaning and purpose of life, right? So was that a question asked by your participants? And two, did your psychoeducation address that?
That's a great question. And, I've thought about possible adaptations for doing this in adults, and that would be something that we would have to address in adults. In teens, we did not get that very much. And I'm surprised. I think that some teens do, especially those who may have made a suicide attempt, might struggle with that question. But mostly what they were struggling with were the here and now crisis that they were having, that they were not looking, that this was not necessarily an existential crisis that they were in.
I just want to share the data that maybe not at this stage, but these were participants, the patients were at
they were
the
teens,
hospital,
yes.
Teens and at the hospital
and
at a very extreme risk. But prior to that, for example, there was a series called Youth and Truth series that was conducted by Sadhguru himself. About 21 universities across the world actually participated in that, and thousands of students would be asking questions in each one of them. And the common question that came across was the meaning and purpose of life. So I just want to share that.
Yes, and I love that comment, because I do think that if I were to adapt this for other settings or an older population, I would definitely look to want to incorporate some of that. Yeah. Great. Any other questions?
I have a few questions for you. What are your thoughts on AI-based approaches to be employed to promote positive emotions and enhance mental well-being amongst youth?
So the question is about AI-based approaches. I think that in some regard, our intervention was kind of like an AI-based approach, because what we did was we had programmed algorithms, right? And I think, quite honestly, before I did this trial, I would have been much more skeptical of AI being able to exert an effect. But I do think that part of it is about the nature of suicide crisis, that they are very fluctuating. And there have been a number of studies that show that even the smallest interventions that are automated. So some of you may have heard about the postcard study, where after discharge, when there was a study where patients would get a postcard that was just said, just hope that you're doing well, and how those who received the postcards had actually less suicide behavior than those who didn't. So I think, yes, I think that there's a lot of richness there and opportunity, because AI does allow us to reach a greater number of people.
Yeah, so my question is, long-term, is the clinical application of this meant to be as an adjunct to CBT or something like that, as opposed to like a standalone?
Oh, it's not a standalone, definitely. And I think I want to be very clear about that, is that this is not a psychotherapy intervention. It's sort of, I think I had designed this in mind to be transportable, to so it can be supplemented with a psychotherapy. So for example, if someone is stuck, let's try this, or we can take a break and try something different. But it's meant to be something that can be transported to other spaces and really fitting with a sort of a public health paradigm.
So also maybe long-term, a plan would be to move it out into other markets where they might not have access to psychotherapy as well, because it seems scalable internationally, even if.
Right. Actually, I think there are a lot of, I think, the next step, which I have been considering, is in EDs, where we do have a tremendous boarding crisis. Can some of this be done on, on an iPad while they're waiting for a hospital bed, or, through primary care clinics, or other areas where there might be a wait list. So ideas like that.
I had a question. So your study was mostly done in patients who are like already identified they are at high risk to have like suicidal behavior. They are inpatients. So this is actually coming from kind of a bit personal also, and because so give a background, like a medical student, and since a teenager, every year we have seen one or two people like your own colleagues or someone who takes that step. So 50% of the time we do know that they do have some kind of high risk, like, you mentioned depression, anxiety, trauma, some, socioeconomic or something. But the other 50%, there is no way to identify. So have you, my question would be, is there a way to identify these people? Because there seems to be no stop, and these are people who are very highly educated. They know, even this was actually a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So they know, they're psychologists. They know what's happening. Even they take that step. So do you think that we can identify these people?
So right now we are very unsuccessful at identifying who is likely to die by suicide. And that's very unfortunate, but numerous studies that I'm not aware of any one study that, there's some studies that might say that, give a positive predictive ratio for suicide attempts or behaviors, but suicide deaths are really, really hard to predict. And I think that's where we might really get the utilization of AI. I think there's a lot of interesting advances in terms of trying to analyze voice and intonation and other types of behaviors, machine learning with social media posts. There's a lot of interesting advances out there. But right now we're really, really bad at it. And part of the reason why is because sometimes when people really want to die by suicide, they do not tell other people. And I think that there's a problem in that many people feel like if I say something, someone's going to hospitalize me right away. And so that's another challenge we have in being able to tolerate the risk of listening to someone's suicide ideation and their pain without taking their autonomy away and without, reacting by hospitalizing them.
So the follow-up question, like you showed the statistics, teenage, that is the leading cause of death in this age group. So do you think that just a universal approach, like without having to identify, just giving education right from the very beginning, or helping friends identify who can be at risk, because it's the immediate circle that can actually help these people out?
Absolutely. I think that it's important to do gatekeeper psychoeducation in terms of identifying at-risk youth. And I do think that in developing this intervention, I too wanted to think about how do we administer this to everybody, right? So there's nothing specific in this intervention about suicide risk. And the text messages, we don't ask about suicide risk. Okay? Not that there's anything wrong with asking about it, right? It doesn't increase, and we should be afraid to ask about it. But the intervention itself can be aimed towards the general population because you don't always know who's at risk.
Thank you.
So some of the Zoom participants did ask this again similar question, where Addy asked, would this be a good intervention to offer within the school as public health initiative? Could this be a universal intervention or best for high risk?
Yeah.
The next question was, how predominant was the effect of positive emotions? Any stats that you came across among the youth who lost their family due to COVID-19 pandemic?
Also, these were trials that were done before COVID. We started the RCT, sometime during COVID, but we don't have that data yet. Oh.
Great.
I do think we should wrap the Q&A now because we're at time for this. But thank you so much, Dr. Yen, for this captivating and informative talk today.
Okay, thank you very much.
So on the slide, you can see how to connect with the MHTTC network. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join us for future presentations, our upcoming event on neurospirituality by Dr. Michael Ferguson will take place on Monday, August 28th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Dr. Ferguson is the first-year wellness director and instructor in neurology at Harvard Medical School. He is the neurospirituality research director at the Center for Brain Circuit Therapeutics and also contributes to research as a research associate at the Center for the Study of World Religions within Harvard Divinity School. This event will take place virtually on Zoom. You may register for this event on Eventbrite by using either the link or the QR code provided here. Next. Join us for the two-day conference featuring enlightening discussions and panel sessions with esteemed guests on October 26-27 this year. Engage in a captivating dialogue between Sadhguru, the globally acclaimed mystic and yogi, and Steven Pinker, a renowned cognitive psychologist. Expand your knowledge and perspective by registering now and securing your spot. You can also follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn for updates on our center. Don't forget to also follow our conference LinkedIn page that gives the latest updates on speakers, panels, and registration regarding conference. Subscribe to the Sadhguru Center's monthly newsletter through the chat link or on-screen QR code. Get updates on events, research findings, and highlights in science and spirituality. You can always reach out to us via email at sadhgurucenter@bidmc.harvard.edu. Thank you very much for joining us. May you all have a wonderful rest of your day.